Okay, good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Avodah Zara Daf Nun Daled. We are, of course, behind a bit. Baruch Hashem for tomorrow's Daf, and Yirtzeh Hashem will be able to learn Daf Nun Hey and Daf Nun Vav, and we'll see how far we get onto Nun Zayin, because those upcoming blot are also very short. So the next many blot are very short. We'll be able to catch up, Baruch Hashem. We had to just stick with all these heavy and thick blot, and Baruch Hashem, last one. Here we go. We're on Daf Nun Daled Amud Aleph, and we're on the fourth line. Tana, the Brisa writes, Ne'evad shelo aser b'shel chaveiro moter. If one were to serve and worship an animal, so if a person worships his own animal, then the animal would be aser b'shel chaveiro. But if you worship my animal, so then that would be mutter, because we have a principle of ein adam oser davar she'eno shelo. You can't come over to my animal and worship it and osir it for me. That's not even a possibility. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. We have a brisa. Zehu ne'avad. What is considered that which is worshipped? And the Gemara says we're on Nun Daled Amud Aleph, 6 lines down. Kol she'ovden oso ben b'shogeg ben uvein b'mezid ben b'ones uvein b'ratzon. So this brisa seems to not be like the other brisa that we just learned. This brisa says that it would be usher no matter what. Meaning, the initial brisa said that if you were to worship my animal, we would have said no, there is no problem with that because eino the moser davar she'eino shelo. But over here we see that that's not the case. Here in this brisa we see that if it was a case of shogeg umezid ones beratzon, we would say that that's problematic. So the Gemara wants to know, Hi ones hechidami. What type of case of onus are we talking about? Lav kegon de onas behemas chaver v'shtachavalo. Wasn't that where I basically against your will bowed down to your animal? So the Gemara says no, that's not what's happening. Amar Rami bar Chama lo kegon she'ansuhu ovdei kochavim. The ovdei kochavim forced me v'shtachavalo behemto didei. They forced me to bow down to my own animal. That's different. So the Gemara is being mechalek, very gentle distinction, hard to hear, but listen to the distinction. There's one ones where you, against my will, bow down to my animal. That doesn't work because ain't the moser davar she'eino shelo. But the type of ones that does work, that does create for Isser, is where you force me to bow down to my own animal. That's a difference, right? The difference is who's serving whose animal. So if I bow down to my idol, ben b'shogeg, ben b'mezid, ben b'onis, ben b'ratzon, that animal is considered ne'evad, and therefore we would consider that to be problematic. That's how the Gemara answers this. The Gemara now pauses to ask a beautiful Shas question, which is Maskefla Reb Zera. I don't understand. Even within Rami Bar Chama's answer, where if you forced me to bow down to my own animal, but ones rachmana patre, tichsiv l'nara lo sa'asa davar, that if a nara amurasa, a woman is engaged and somebody violates her, lo sa'asa davar, nothing happens to her. So then, within Rami Bar Chama's answer in distinguishing between the brisas, where he would say that the ones would create avodah zara is where you force me to bow down to my own animal. There, the brisa said ben b'shogeg, ben b'mezid, ben b'onis, ben b'ratzon, that would be considered ne'evad. That's avodah zara, and you're not allowed to. That animal then becomes usher. But why don't we say ones rachmana patre? Why don't we say that? Okay, they forced me to bow down. No, you can't force me to bow down. Ones rachmana patre. They hold the gun to your head and they say, "Do this right now, and I'm going to kill you." So then you're like, "Okay, I'll bow down to the to my own cow." We'll discuss that in the Gemara today. Good. And not the conclusion of our Gemara. But it's not the psak, it's just not the conclusion of our Gemara. We'll see there's iterations and whatever. Yeah, I gotta look at Ayin and Shulchan Aruch. These are complicated sugyas because what we know to be staples in halacha, we only know the final psak. We don't know the whole development of the psak. So the Gemara says, why isn't this considered ones rachmana patre? So the Gemara takes out the word ella, and the Gemara says, Amar Rava, Hakol hayu bichlal lo sa'ovdem. Really, I might have thought that from the pasuk of lo sa'ovdem, which is a pasuk in Shemos, lo sishtacha ve'elohem lo sa'ovdem ki anuchi Hashem elokecha b'chule. So the Gemara says, and Rashi here says, Hakol hayu. You look at this Rashi points out on the fifth line, Hakol hayu bein ones bein ratzon. From the pasuk of Losa Ovdaim, I would have thought that anything that was served is going to be aser. But then comes along the Torah and gives another level of detail, not just lo sovdim, but also another level, which is when the Torah says v'chai bohem, that the Torah is meant to be lived by, not meant to die, v'lo she'emos behem. And then the Gemara says yatsa ones, which means that if there's a case of ones, then you're pater. Then the Gemara says, but wait, there's chilul Hashem. And chilul Hashem you should die for also. There the Gemara says that afilu b'ones. So on Ketzad, we have two seemingly opposite sets of drushos. One set of drushos seems to say yatsa ones, that you don't, that you're not going to be held accountable for a case of ones. The other one says that afilu b'ones, it's chilul Hashem, you have to die. So the Gemara says, Ketzad, habit sina. So this, Rabbi Cantor, is what you were asking. Habitzina is that one case is where we would say that you're not going to be chayev, is if you were bitzina and they forced you. We don't paskin this way. This is what the Gemara says. Habifarhesia, where you'd have to die no matter what. In fact, no matter what halacha, if you're bifarhesia, we're not b'kama. Right. So this is discussed in Shulchan Aruch. These are very delicate and complicated halachos. And I'll just add that God forbid a person should ever be in such a circumstance, but you'd really need to know the halachos very well. Like, let's say, for example, they say, I want you to bow down to this statue of Yashka. Is that statue be'etzem avodah Zara such that it's aser?
It depends on
which church you're in, right? It probably depends on what church you're in. So these are like bedakus halacha. Again, I hope no Rahman al Hashem should protect us. We should never be in these scenarios, but you have to know the cases very well. We know by arayos that the Torah says Yehareg v'Yavar. Does that mean touch this woman or I'll kill you? Touch. So I'm a Moel. I go in the suburbs. I have women who offer a hand to shake my hand all the time. If the woman offering to shake my hand is female clergy, she should know better. I won't shake her hand. Sorry, I can't shake her hand. If it's Stama and I'm Haaretz, no problem. You can shake my hand. So the poskim, they're clear. Like if by you, and I hope if you're normal that this is not a problem, if by you shaking hands with a woman is arousing, so first of all, you need help. And second of all, that then becomes an Isser Doraisa because there's arousal there. But if it were to be the case, like most people, Baruch Hashem, that you can shake hands, the only thing I think if I'm going to shake a woman's hand is I wish I didn't have to do this. That is the constant theme. Oh, okay, Bubby Nancy. That's usually what happens. It's usually not the moms. Masha Ein Kain, we would not say that there's a heter, like we have a heter for shaking hands according to many, but the dead fish, whatever the leniencies are. But there is no heter for kissing a woman on the cheek, even if it's the standard of the French culture. No, that's not a heter. That's awesome. Because we don't allow for the brain doesn't allow for distinction. If you're giving a woman a kiss on the cheek, we assume that is your brain is not capable of separating that from a hearer. So we draw the line. That's not where we would say that it's allowed. We'd be categorical about it. I've never been kissed as a mole, thank God. I'd like to keep it that way. I've gotten a few hugs over the years from mothers who totally caught me off guard. I was like, okay, have a nice day, holding 2 bags, and this woman's like, she extended her hand. I'm like, oh, my hands are full. Great to meet you. She's like, don't worry, I'm a hugger. So I had a bag in each hand, and this little woman just came in and could you like read the room a little bit, maybe? Some social skills.
She hugged you.
Yeah, that's a chakira. Yeah. I agree to that distinction. It would be completely weird if the opposite were true. Aser and weird and totally a chilul Hashem because I'm frum. I'm saying like that's not. This was just weird, and we were in a room with other people, and other frum people were in the room, and all the frum people like burst out laughing because I played my cards perfectly. I was holding 2 bags. That's the hack. I had 2 bags. You hold 2 bags. And all like Bruce Leon was there. We all like had a good chuckle.
You got your elbows out too. So
I know. Should wear a sign. Please don't hug me. I have COVID. Just wouldn't work well for the bris, but yeah. Okay, anyways, that's the Gemara's distinction of habitzina, habifarhesia, a very complex answer to say that bitzina, that would be less usher. If it's avodah zarah, it should be usher everywhere. Okay, Amrulay Rabban and Rava. So then they said to Rava, "Oh, we have a raya for you. Tanya de Misayelach. We have a proof. Bimusios, which we said yesterday were some type of pedestals. Shel Ovdei Kochavim b'shas hashmad. It should say. Does your Gemara say b'shas hashmad, or do you have b'shas hagzera? Okay, I have b'shas hagzera also. That's not really the true girsa. Oh, so here that's really not the right language. The Gemara says hashmad kisvei kachu b'chol.
No, it says hashmad.
What?
But in the notes,
Yeah, that's for sure. But that really should be the gears of the Gemara. Interestingly, the censors came in and they changed it, and that's what it says over here. V'nishtane b'dvarav. I don't know what this stands for. Pei dalad mem min ha censor dikduke sofer. So the word censor is not a new word; it's an old word. Okay, so the Gemara says that we have a raya for Shitas Rava that there's a chakira between Sina and Farasya, that in a time of Shas Hashmad, Afal Pisha Gzera Batla, in Shas Hashmad you're not allowed to sit on that because you're not allowed to sit on that pedestal because it's Shas Hashmad. Osan Bimasos Lo Batlu. But even after the Gzera is gone, then Lo Batlu, there's not going to be a canceling of the Gemara, and that's true even if you're forced to bow down to that. Even if they made you bow down, that still wouldn't matter. Amar Lahu, they said back to him, Rava says back to them, Imi Shumha, if that's your argument, Lo Tzayan, then that Bryce is actually not a raya for me. Amar, I could have said, Yisrael Mumar Haba Upalach Labaratzo. Every once in a while, you find it, unfortunately, probably all too often, you find a Yid who's willing to not keep halacha. In fact, the finding a Yid who's willing to keep halacha is the exception, by the numbers. In the Shtat, it's a little bit better. So where we are, we have people who are pretty from, thank God. So the Rava says that, no, that's not a raya. In that case, it could be that you had a Yisrael Mummer who's willing to do Avodah Zara. I just heard, who told me this Maisa yesterday, that someone's child from the suburbs, they decided to grow Jewish. They became a pastor. He married a Sheikh Tzemedel whose family was like from Catholics, and he became a clergy on their side. Hashem Yirachim. It's like that's a hard story to bring home. So it says the Gemara that maybe that guy's Yisrael Mumma. Rav Ashi says, Amar lo tema Amar. Don't say that maybe there was such a case. Elovada Yisrael Mumar havu palacharatzon. Pashut, that by the numbers there's going to be a Jew in a Shas Hashmad who's going. Just imagine the times of the Marranos, right? Or imagine the times where there was forced conversions by any of the many countries who did that to Jews. Every once in a while, it's like, yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, I'll join your religion. So what do you mean, Amar? Perhaps there's no perhaps. There's always one guy who's gonna be like, yes, I believe in your religion now. Okay, he's unstable, whatever the case may be. People who, and there's a beautiful study on this. People who come from very, very, very stable homes pray better. Why? This is so fascinating. When you grow up in a home that has healthy lines of authority. And I had that. I grew up in a home with parents where the parents were in charge. So then you transfer that over to prayer where you know that you're not in charge and someone else is in charge. It's easier to pray. Masha Enkain, in families where there were broken hierarchies, where the kids call their parents by their first name, where the kids talk chutzpah dicta. I couldn't get away with that when I was younger. You couldn't do it. You couldn't do it. So I said to my kids all the time, like, the way you're talking to me, if I spoke to my parents that way, they would kill me. Not with their physical hands, but with that look of like, did you just talk to me that way? And the Karesh is just, some of us were chutzpahdik sometimes, but not so often. So my kids are like, that's because you're perfect. I'm like, go talk to my parents. You will see that I was a good kid, but not a perfect kid. Anyways, this guy is off the derech, and that's what the Gemara is pushing back on. We're 2/3, 3/4 of the way down on Mandal. Chizkiah Amar, Chizkiah is giving actually a second answer to the stira that we started with. We started with a stira that one brisa had said that if somebody is serving their own animal, it will be usher. If they're serving the animal of a friend, it would be mutter because Eino the Moser Davar Shein Shalom. And the next brisa said, Bein Ba'onis, Bein B'ratzon, Bein B'shogig, Bein B'mezid, that it would still be usher. Afal pi that it's ein adam osir davar she'eino shelo. So Chizkiah gives another answer. Chizkiah amar kigon shenisech la'avodas kochavim yain al karneha. So in this case, the Avodah Zara was to pour wine, a libation, on the horns of a bull. Probably a bad idea. Don't try this at home. Maskif Lervada Barava says the Gemara, I don't understand. Hi Nevadhu? No, that's not. That doesn't make the animal Avodah Zara. Hi Bimus Ba'almahu V'Sharia. In that case, the animal is the pedestal. Your Avodah was pouring the wine. The libation was the Avodah Zara. But that's not a service of the animal. You're doing a libation for whatever other deity. It just happens to be on an animal. The Avad Ba is a huge yesod in regards to doing something against the rules. Really, we would say, the most davar she'eino shalom. I'm not allowed to bow down to your animal and make your animal asur. But if I do a ma'isa to your animal, then it becomes asur. Then we override the rule of the most davar she'eino shalom. So let's say that Daniel has a cow in the backyard, and I want to do Avodah Zara. So if I walk over to the animal and I bow down to the animal, the most davar she'eino shalom. I can't asur your animal. But if I take my chashuva bottle of wine and I say to deity X, I'm going to pour this wine on the horns of the bull that's in his backyard, a bull, not a cow, I understand. So I'm going to pour, so then your animal becomes asur because I did a maisa to the animal. It's not a maisa to the animal. It's not really to the animal. It's on the animal, it's at the animal, but you didn't puncture, you didn't so it's interesting. I'm raising it as a question.
Because of we mentioned days ago about similarities between that and the Mishkan, at least another type of thing.
That's beautiful. That's true in regards to the act that you're doing of pouring. So it has to be something that has a din of pnim. Yes, that's why the libations is a good example of wine. It doesn't explain the question that we were just making facial expressions about, which is why the animal became asur. You didn't do a maisa to the animal. You poured wine on the animal. That's not. Is that to the animal? It's on the animal. I would have argued. I'm wrong. I would have argued. That's what the Gemara says. And this idea is not new. And says the Gemara 7 lines from the bottom. First of the long lines. If I were to bow down to Daniel's bull that he keeps in his backyard, so then lo asra, because they know the most davar she'eino shalom. But also b'ma'isa, then asra. That even though it's true of ein the most davar she'eino shalom, but we have a pecking order in halacha. That halacha goes to the wayside when I do a ma'isa to your animal. Amar lehu Rav Nachman. Rav Nachman says to Ula, he says puku v'amru le'ula. Somebody should go tell Ula. This isn't his idea. This idea that you can be mishtachave and it won't be asur, but you do a ma'isa and it is asur. We already learned that. We already had this idea in Bavel without you, Ula. That once you shech one of the simanim, so then asra. And that is the ma'isa that you did. Afal pi that it's not your animal. Whose animal was it? Look at it. So if I do shchita, l'shem avodas kochavim to your animal, that becomes asur ben b'shogeg, ben b'mezid, ben b'onis, ben b'ratz. And that's Chizkiah's response to the stira that we started with today in the two brisas, to say that if I do a ma'isa to your animal, afal pi that we generally hold ein adam osir davar she'eino shalom, doesn't apply here because there's an override. The override is that a ma'isa was done. Minale de Asra. What's the Mari Makom? How do we know the Rav Huna's right? Ilema mi Kohanim. And Rashi over here paints a horrible picture. Rashi is 10 lines from the bottom of the Rashi's Dibur Hamaschil Inema mi Kohanim. That at some time, in a horrible time in history, She'ansum Malchei Yisrael Lasos Komrim La'avodas Kochavim. That certain kings of Israel who were Rishayim forced Kohanim to become priests for Avodas Kochavim. So if that's what you're talking about, kevan sheshacha basiman ilim kohanim v'dil mashayni kohanim dibnei deninu. That's different. If you have kohanim and the kohanim were told, "I'm forcing you to be a priest," they should have said, "Over my dead body." They're bnei dea. They had an option. But Daniel's bull that he has in the backyard is not a bar dea. So don't bring me a raya from there. Those cases are not similar. Then the Gemara says, if you want to say that perhaps we can learn that something about the Mizbeach is true, because what happened with the stones of the Mizbeach by the Yevonim? They destroyed the Mizbeach. Ein adam oser davar she'enu shelo. It's not theirs. Yet still the Chashmonaim hid them in the Mizrachis Tzfonis, in the northeast room of the Azara. That's what we saw a few blot ago. So why don't we learn from there that when a Maisa is done, we learn that from a goy? Says the Gemara, V'dilma k'derav Papa. This was like we saw over there. And Rashi highlights what this case is. What did Rav Papa teach us? Last Rashi on the page. To Amar Kra, Ashkechu v'daru sheyatzu l'chulin, u'kenaum, that the animals actually became chulin, and then the goyim u'kenaum ovdei kochavim, then v'yachlu la'asran. No, it wasn't that they were oser davar she'eno shelo. They were oser davar shelo, and they asered it. That's why the Chashmonaim hit it. We weren't willing to say it's mutter. That brings us to the top of Dalet Amud Beis, Azaftiga Amud, one of the bigger ones. We see these at like the end of Brachos, these kinds of pages. Baruch Hashem, it's beautiful Gemara, as many Gemaras are. We'll finish Yirtzeh Hashem at the top of Daf and Ham and Aleph, about 5-6 lines down. The Elami Kalim. The reason we know Rav Huna's din is true is from the case of Kalim. What is the case of Kalim? So the top Rashi says, Elami Kalim shall beis hamikdash she's nicham Achaz. Achaz was not a good person, and Achaz he desecrated the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash. The pasuk says on the top line of Nun Daled Mud Beis, all the Kalim that he ruined, we re-prepared and we re-sanctified. And what we saw a blot ago, maybe 2 blot ago, was Amar Mar Heichanu was Shaganzum. They were all hidden. All the Kalim that Achaz ruined were not reused, they were hidden. What do we see? That Achaz didn't own the Kalim. But what happened to them? They became Aser. Why did they become Aser? Because he did a Maisa. What do we see? That a Maisa overrides the principle of Ein Adam Oser Davar She'enu Shelo. That's what the Gemara says. Ein Adam Oser Davar She'enu Shelo. How could Achaz have ruined the Kalim of the Beis Hamikdash? He doesn't own them. That was true over there by the Kalim in the Beis Hamikdash. Hachanami, in our case as well, by a friend's animal. If I pour wine on the bull that belongs to Daniel, Asra. And that's how the Gemara brings its raya to the Shita of Rav Huna, and as well to the Shita of Ula, that we see this Mar Makom, that when there's a Maisa that's done, it overrides the general rule of Ein Adam Oser Davar She'enu Shelo. It's hektish. Yeah.
So
Hashem. The Gavoa language of the Gemara would have been elsewhere that it's Gavoa.
does that have anything to play here in terms of, it's Davar She'enu Shelo? It's not Shelo. It's not anybody's. It's
Had it been Hefkervelt, had it been like real Hefker, then we would have said such a thing. But it's not really true. It's not. Yeah, it has a status. It's not owned by a Baal. It's not owned by an individual. See you later.
Sorry.
No, you're good, man. So, had it been that it wasn't hektish and it was kind of, Hefker, then it would have been theirs. Then we wouldn't have said Ein Adam Oser Davar She'enu Shelo. But it's not that way. It's hektish, and therefore you have no right to ask or something that doesn't belong to you. It's interesting because, like, the Maisa of the word Maisa is, now we know the word Maisa is the wrong word, but to be nishtachave is not a Maisa. It's an Avodah, but it's not a Maisa, because otherwise I could ask your animal just by bowing down to it. Okay. That's what the Gemara says, and that brings us to the first of the middle width lines, I should say. I wish it was the very long lines. On Nun Daled Amud Beis. Ki Aser Rav Dimi Amar Rav Yochanan Af Pi Shamra Mishtach V'Lekarka Olam Lo Asra. Even though in general we would say that a person who bows down to dirt, you can't aser karka, but there's an exception. Chafar Baboros Shichin Umaros. If you do digging, then asra, which is an unbelievable principle because it's mechuber lekarka. It's all connected to the ground. And in fact, we had this Gemara earlier about if people make a mountain into a deity, we said, v'lo haharim Eloheim. But nevertheless, the Gemara over here says it's also. Ki Aser Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda Amar Rav Yochanan Af Pi Sham Mishtach Vel Baalei Chaim Lo Asran. Even though if one bows down to an animal, it doesn't become Aser. Asan Chalip and Avodas Kochavim Asran. But if I then took that animal and switched it for an Avodah Zara, I'll take your animal, you take my Avodah Zara. That process of chalip and halachically makes that animal aser. Even though had you bowed down to the animal, which sounds like it's more direct, We wouldn't have said that that's aser because ain't the most davar shein shalom. But if bechalipin I say, give me your bull, here is an avodah zara, and we do the trade, that chalipin works, and your animal is now aser. Again, it's just so interesting because chalipin holds a higher level. The swap is higher level than the avoda of hishtachava. So again, there's a lot of chidushim here. It's just these pages are jam packed. Ki asarav and Amar pligu ba Rabbi Shmuel ben Rabbi Yossi v'Rabbanan Chad Amar chalipin asurin. One says that if Rabbi Daniel and I switch, I give him a pesel and he gives me the bull, that the bull is aser, and Chad Amar chalipin asurin, chalipin mutarin. But if he then trades the bull for another animal, then the next animal is mutar. But v'chad amar afilu chalipe nami aser, and it goes all the way down the line. So here's how it would work. I take a pesel, I give it to Reb Daniel, he gives me the bull. I take that bull, I sell it to my father for the sheep in the backyard. Now that sheep is fine, right? The bull might still be problematic, but the sheep is fine. So according to this Gemara, there's a machlokes. Is it just chalipin, the first animal that was swapped for the avodah zara, or is it chalipin, an endless path of swaps that always carries with it the isser status of that animal because it's similar to avodah zara? So says the Gemara. My time of demand amar chalipin asur. Why would it be for those who say that we always kick the can down the road and we always hold on to that status of isser? So I give the pesel to Daniel, he gives me the bull, and then I sell it to Sandberg for a sheep, and he sells it down the road. All of them are aser, because Amar Kamo. That's what the pasuk says, that everything should be like the initial one. Kol sha'ata mehaya mimenu hareu kamosa. Whatever transactions, whatever realities you have with your animals, the halachic status doesn't change. The Shita who holds that chalipin is mutarin, what would they say about the pasuk of Isacherem Kamo? They would say Amar Krahu, hu velo chalipin. Only this one's aser, but not the chalipin. The Shita that holds that chalipin is aser. What do you do with the pasuk of hu? Hahumi baile lemeute orla v'kiloi hakerem, to exclude a case of orla and kiloi hakerem. Sheim machran v'kidesh b'dmehen mekudeshes, that if they were sold, the Orla and the Kiloi HaKerem, and if they were sold, so then they would be Mekudeshes. That's what the word Hu teaches us. That teaches us that there is a carryover of Chalipin into the world of Kiloi HaKerem and Orla. What would the Shita who holds that chalipin is mutter? What would they say? Or levkilei kerem lo tzrichim meuta. They don't need to be excluded. Dahavi leavodas kochavim v'shvi shnei ksuvin abayin keechad. These two things both teach the same din. V'shnei ksuvin abayin keechad ein melamdin. That you can't. If you only have one pasuk in Chumash, you could make a binyanav. You can extrapolate from one place to another. We have a binyanav that women are pater for mitzvos aseh shazman grama because of. But we learn from tefillin. But what if there were two halachos that taught a similar halacha? So if you only have one, I could build a binyan. But once I have two, then ein malamdin. Because it's clear if the Torah went out of its way to include a second one, pashut that it doesn't apply to more than those two. Shnei ksuvin abayin ke'echad, ein malamdin. So let's go to the psukim. Avodas kochavim hada amran. That was the pasuk where we said vayisachem kamohu, to teach us that there's chalipin asurin. And by Shvius, we have the same idea. Dichsiv ki yovel hikodesh shelachem ma kodesh tofes es dama ve'aser. Av Shvius tofes es dama ve'aser. It's always going to be aser. I don't care how many times you trade it. It's always going to be aser. So that should be shnei ksuvin abayin ke'echad, and shnei ksuvin abayin ke'echad ein melamdin. So I don't need the pasuk of who, and therefore this shita is kaftor b'fera. Says the Gemara. Wait 1 second. Ma kodesh. Tofes says damav v'yotze l'chulin, but hold on 1 second. According to those who say that when it comes to money, that if there was something holy and I can make the money profane, I can make the money into something chol. Av shvis tofes says damav v'yotze l'chulin, which we know is not true. You can never make shvis into chulin. Talmud lomar tihye. The pasuk says tihye. Let's see where this pasuk is. This pasuk is. Vayikra chafei yud beis ki yovel hi kodesh tielachem in asodeh tochlu es tevu asa. So that word tihiyah teaches us about yasa tehei, that it has to always keep the status of kedusha haketzad. What would an example of this be? Lakach beperos shvius basar. If you purchase with the fruits of shvius, you buy a piece of meat. Elu ve'elu misbarim b'shvius. Both of them are going to require biur, meaning they both have the kedusha of shvius. Now, lokach bebasar dagim, if I take that meat which has a din of beer, and I buy dagim, yatsa basar nichnasu dagim. Then we transfer the dagim yayin. If I buy with the fish yayin, yatsa dagim nichnas yayin. So there's always one entity that always holds. It's the truma. It's the item that was transferred to. So then it's always going to be aser. Be yayin shemen. If you with wine, if you buy oil, yatsa yayin v'nichnas haketzad. Said the Gemara, what would the case then be? Achron nispas b'shvis. The Gemara says that the last one always holds on to the shvis, upri atzmo aser, and the initial fruit is always going to be aser. So that's what the Gemara says over here. This is a beautiful argument that you're not able to say, that you're not able to extrapolate of I just forgot of chalipe and asurin. The idach they said there's a machlokas about what we saw earlier. The idach they hold ksavar shnei and a bank echad malamdin. We can still extrapolate from two psukim that have the same din, and even though we have the same din by shvius and we have the same din by our case, doesn't matter. We say that they're malamdim, and therefore we therefore need to exclude the case of shvius from this halacha. That brings us to our Mishnah. I know you like history. This one's a good one. This is a pretty decent Mishnah over here that speaks about some fascinating conversations. Shalu Sazaken and Biromi. The elder Jews spoke to, I should say, the Jews spoke to the elders of Rome. I should say, not correct. The elders of Rome spoke to the Jews. Im ein ritzono ba'avodas kochavim, lama eina mevatla. Tell Kodesh Baruch Hu to get rid of the Avodah Zara. Amru lo, ilu ledavar she'ein tzarech la'olam bo hayu ovdin hayam mevatlo. If the things they were servicing had no need in the world, Pasha we would have gotten rid of it. But harehin ovdin lechama v'lalavana u'lekochavim u'lemazalos. What do you want Hashem to do? To take the sun out of the sky? We need the sun. The Earth is the only planet in its proximity that could support the kinds of lives that we have. It's not too hot. It's not too cold. Today I saw an article. There are places in Israel that will hit 50 degrees Celsius. That is 122 degrees Fahrenheit. We have in America too, in some of the southern states and carrying across the Midwest, extremely high temperatures. But it's livable, right? It's hard. You got to drink a lot of water, but it's livable. So you can't take the sun out of the sky. So therefore, because of these crazy people are serving deities like the sun and the moon, so then Yovad Olamo Mipnei Shotim. It's not my language. The Gemara calls them Shotim. It's a rhetorical question. So Amar Lo says the Gemara, well, Im Kain Yovad Davar Shein Tzarech LaOlam Bo V'Aniach Davar Shetzarech Olam Bo. So the Zakanim of Rome said, fine, but let's at least get rid of the deities that have no need. You got people who are serving a table, a chair, a piece of wood. Get rid of those kinds of stones. We don't need them. We'll be fine. And leave the sun, the moon, and the stars. So say the Rabbanim, with all of their beautiful wisdom, Amru lahen, they said, Afanu machzikin yedei ovdein shel elu. If we were to get rid, listen to this is a beautiful svara. If we were to get rid of the objects that are really ridiculous that people worship, stones, if we got rid of those, but we kept the sun and the moon and the stars and the constellations. So then you're machzik yidei of den shel, the world can't go on without the sun, moon, and the stars. V'haraya that our Avodah Zara is really the real deal. But the Chachamim give a beautiful response. Say the Gemara, yeah, says the Gemara, Amr Lehen, end of the Mishnah, 2/3 of the way down, on Nun Daled Amud Beis. Afanu machzikin yidei of den shel elu, she'omrim teidu Hein Elohos Shaharei Hein Lo Batlu. Right, they must be real Avodah Zaras because the Kodesh Baruch Hu didn't destroy these; He only destroyed those. Therefore, a Kodesh Baruch Hu has to let people make their own mistakes. He has to let people have their Avodah Zaras. There are plenty of things in this world that would make the world a lot easier if we didn't have. Hashem should get rid of them in theory, but if we got rid of them, then the things that you don't get rid of almost seem more chashuv in a way, and that's unacceptable. At the Gemara, 20 lines from the bottom of the page, Tana Rabbanan, Shalu Filosofim es Hazakenim Biromi. The philosophers asked the elders of Rome, Im Elohechem ein ritzono be'avodas kochavim, Elokechem, excuse me. They said, if your God doesn't want these avodah zaras, mipnei ma eino mevatla, why wouldn't Hashem get rid of them? It's a brisa repeating similar storylines. It's actually a tosefta, excuse me, as you can see in the Maseches Hashas. So Amru Lahem, they said, Ilu ledavar sheina olam tzarech lo hayu ovdin harehi mavatla. If everyone was only worshiping ridiculous things, plastic, metal, whatever it was, we'd get rid of it. Harehin ovdin lecham avalavana lukolchav mulamazelis. Yovad olam ibnei ashotim. Same sentiment as we saw in our Mishnah. We can't do that. We can't get rid of the sun, the moon, and the stars and the constellations because you're crazy. That's a you problem. That's not an us problem. Ela olam. This is the line that we need for right now. Ela olam kimen hago noheg. Kadosh Baruch Hu created a reality that the world continues as is. There's rules of nature, and people have bechira. You can make bad choices, and you can make good choices. V'shotim shekilkelu asidin litein esadin. Yikes! We're getting close to the month of Elul. It's time to start thinking about. It's always time to start thinking about how we're doing. But here the Gemara says, if you're going to be a shote, you're going to pay the price. That's no one gets off scot-free. If we live our lives addicted to things we shouldn't be, serving things we shouldn't be, thinking things we shouldn't think, and looking at things we shouldn't look at, we're going to pay the price. That's what the Gemara says. Davar acher, another response that the Yidden might have given. Haresh gazal sa shel chitim. If I steal a unit of measure of wheat, v'halach v'zara bekarka, and then I planted it. Really, din hu shelo titzmach. Nature should have it that should not grow. But that's not the way the world turns. You ganeved my seeds and you planted them in your yard. You're a thief. It would have been nice. It would have been nice if the world had some built-in checks and balances in the teva way. Of course, klape shmaya, there's a lot of things that are built in. But that's what the Gemara says, that even if one steals, the ground is going to grow, and the shotim will pay the price. Davar acher, haresh habal eshes chavero. A man is very inappropriate, breaks all the gedarim and all the halachos, he cohabits with another person's wife. Dinu shaloti saber. It would have made sense that she shouldn't have conceived, even if they're both fertile. Kadosh Baruch Hu should have made it that they didn't conceive. Ela olam kimin hago noig v'holech v'shotim shekilkelu asidin litein esadin. That's what the Gemara says. So therefore, we have to just be conscientious that the world functions and we don't always see immediate consequences to our actions. And we may be going down a path at times, hopefully not, chas v'shalom, but we may be going down a path where we're making some poor decisions. Yes, it would be nice if that's not the way the world works. So if a person makes a bad decision, HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to let that decision play out, even though it's bad for you. And who's going to be litein esadin? You're a shota. You're going to be the one who's on the hook. Hainu da Amar Reish Lakish, first of the super long lines, 12 lines from the bottom. HaKadosh Baruch Hu lo dayan l'rishayim she'osin sela sheli pumbi, that they made my coins problematic. Ela shematzrichen osi umachtimin osi bal korchi. They force me to do things that I don't want to do. If one has a child with a woman that was aser, so then that forces Hashem to create a new neshama. If one is planting seeds that they stole, that's forcing Hashem to allow growth to happen for things that are aser. V'chulei. Sha'al Philosophus Echad Es Rabban Gamliel. One of these philosophers asked a question to Rabban Gamliel. Akasu b'Toraschem, your Torah says, Ki Hashem Elokecha Eish Ochlahu Kel Kana. Kadosh Baruch Hu is consuming, and He's a jealous God. Asks the Gemara, a bit of a klutz kasha, but the Gemara asks nevertheless, Mipnei ma miskana be'ovdeha ve'ein miskana bo. Why is it that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is jealous of the ones doing the serving and not the one being served? You would have thought that if HaKadosh Baruch Hu was going to have a jealousy, again, kaviyachol, this is all anthropomorphism, we can't relate to any of these words, but you would have seen a jealousy of, why are they serving that God? I wish they'd serve me. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu's jealousy is not about that other God. The jealousy is in fact about the ones who serve the other God. So says the Gemara, Amar lo, Rabban Gamliel responds to them, Em shalacha mashal lema davar domer. Allow me to give you a mashal in order to explain. Lamelech basar v'dam. There was a flesh and blood king. Shahayalo ben echad, he had one son. V'osa haben hayemegada lo es hakelev. And this son bought a dog, as did apparently so many other people. Ve'eh lelo sham, ve'eh lelo shem al shem aviv. Okay? There's a king. Let's say his name was Chaim the king. He had a son, David. David named the dog Chaim, which is the name of his father. Now, that's not allowed with children. I don't know what the halachos are with dogs and naming things, but that's what this guy did. When he would curse, he would say, cursing you in the name of my dog Chaim, which was really his father's name. So, Ksheshama Hamelech al Mihu Koes. When HaKadosh Baruch Hu sees that his son David is cursing in the name of the dog Chaim, who is the father, the king, going to be upset at? Al HaBenhu Koes or Al HaKelevu Koes? He's going to be mad at the dog. The fact that Chaim was the name of the dog and David cursed and blasphemed in the name of the dog, the father's going to look at the son and say, "You're such a fool." Same thing with Avodah Zara. Havi Omer al HaBenhu Koes. Amar lo kelevata koreosa, v'halo yesh b'mamish. Amar lo umar rois. What is it that you see in the dog? Amar lo pamachas nafla dleika be'irenu. There was a fire. V'nisrafa kol ha'ir kula. The whole city burned down. V'osa beis avodah zara lo nisraf. Says the Gemara. Amar lo. This is what the philosoph said to him. He said, Am shalocha mashal amal davar domeh. There was a fire, and the only building left standing was the base of Avodah Zara. What do you think the priest? Oh, the Eibishter is Van Elfen. He saved us. No. Here's the mashal. The Melech Basar V'dam Shesarcha Alav Medina Ksho Ose Milchama Im Achayim Hu Ose O Im Hamesim Hu Ose. If a king is going to wage a war, is he going to wage a war with those who are living or with those who are dead? With those who are living. So Kadosh Baruch Hu, who burns down a person's house, that's part of the relationship. Sometimes things are complicated. Sometimes people deserve things that are difficult. But when you get no care from a Kadosh Baruch Hu, that's the worst. The silence is deadly. So these people are mesim even in their life. You're worshiping idols. You're a mace while you're alive. Kadosh Baruch Hu doesn't need to burn your building down. You've already burned yourself down. You're done. So that was the mashal that he gave. Have omer imachayim hu ose. You're calling us dogs. You're calling us dead people. Maybe you should say, therefore, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should get rid of us, the Ovdei Avodah Zara. Amar lo, ilu ledavar she'ena olam tzarach lo, hayu ovdin, harei hu mavadla. Harei hein ovdin l'chama v'la v'la kochavan l'mazos la'afikim u'legeos. If someone is going to praise all of these things, all these earthly things, the last two are springs and valleys. Yovad olamam ibnei hashotim. The fact that you're worshiping an Avodah Zara, we can't get rid of Avodah Zara, like we spoke about in our Mishnah. V'cheinu omer, and we're getting to the conclusion of today, right on time. The pasuk says in Tzvanya, Asof Osef Kol Me'al Pnei Ha'adam Anu Hashem. We're going to destroy everything on the ground. And then the next pasuk says, this pasuk is also from Tzvanya. The next pasuk, Asef Adamu V'Hema. Asef Of Hashamayim. We're going to destroy all these things. Udgei Hayam V'Mechshal Sasar Hashem V'Gomer V'Chim B'Nei Sherashayim Nechshal B'Han Yov Demina Olam V'Halo Lo Adam Hein Ovdim. These things are helpful. And that's what the pasuk says. V'ichrati es ha'adam me'al pnei ha'adama. I'll get rid of the people. But the avodah zara, those things aren't going to stay. So we'll stop right here. And Emir Hashem, tomorrow night we'll get a couple of blottim. We'll start at Shal Agrippas. And wishing you all a beautiful night.